I'd like to start by talking about retirement security writ large, and then move to the PBGC. Even with working longer, we are living so much longer that the average period of retirement is about 30% longer. But unfortunately, pensions simply have not kept up over the last 30 years. Two things have been true. One is, it is still true that less than half the private sector workers in America have an employer-provided plan. So coverage matters a lot. And most important, the form of that employer-provided plan has shifted very, very substantially from a defined benefit model to a defined contribution model. And that has enormous consequences. We want to foster all kinds of retirement security plans to note that you can develop a DB model that provides adequate retirement security. However, as an empiricist, the fact is that the shift to DC has resulted in people saving less. It's resulted in people earning less. The average return, the various consulting firms have estimated anything 100 bips a year or more difference, and 1% a year return over a working lifetime is a lot of money. The shift to DC has resulted in people saving less, earning less, and having less. According to one survey, the average person on the verge of retirement has about $230,000 in their 401k. So it then said, okay, suppose you level funded that $230,000 at the old life expectancy. That would give you about $20,000 a year payment. But, of course, people are living longer now. So if you were the average person and level funded the $230,000 over 22 years, that would be about a 15% lower payment. So when people roll out of their 401k, they can and do some buy annuities, but a fair number do not. Some fraction of the $230,000 goes to buy an education for the grandchild. Some fraction of the $230,000 turns into that trip that you've always wanted to take, and then the rest goes to fund your retirement along with, for the vast majority of people, Social Security. The result, my fear is, that as we live longer and as we shift to the majority defined contribution universe, is we're going to get a lot of people who discover in their late 70s that they've run out of money. So this is not a question necessarily of just working longer before you retire. It is discovering that your nest egg isn't enough of a nest egg. For that reason, one of the things that I think is important is to try to preserve both the characteristics of DB plans and the extent possible that we have them. The question is, we know that employers are moving away. Why are they? A bunch of reasons. The explanations are actually quite consistent. The most important one is cost. Companies are trying to reduce their employee benefit costs. Their health costs are going up, therefore they want their retirement costs to go down. The easiest way for them to do so is not to go through the process of modifying a DB plan. The easiest way for them to do so is to say, we're going to give you a new plan, and you're going to pay half, and the employer is going to pay half, or we're going to have something that matches. And the change in form covers a diminution in cost that is very substantial. Another important aspect is the way the government has regulated minimum funding requirements has been increasingly to tighten them. And as a result, companies that have been, even those companies that would like to stay within the DB system, are nonetheless reminded that due to the combination of mark-to-market accounting on pension funds and increasingly stringent minimum funding requirements, their cash flow gets moved around very substantially. This drives corporate treasurers, to use a really technical term that I only know because I spent a decade plus in finance, nuts. There are other reasons. One is the portability issue, which, and I'll return to that, noting that Richard Shea is sitting in the front row, waiting for me to talk about his issue. Issues about accounting and mark-to-market. And lastly, it is a fact that the way our regulatory system has grown up, we regulate differentially DB plans much more extensively than we do DC plans. The disclosure requirements are greater, some of the eligibility requirements are more intense, some of the actuarial calculations are considerably greater. First myth that I think is important to talk about is the idea that DB plans are already gone. They are not. Are they in trouble? Are they threatened? Are they losing market share? Absolutely. But are they gone? No. That would be news to 75 million people. And the employers of 36 million people, about half public, half private. All the plans that still do exist are frozen. That is not true. Capital N, capital T. The fact is, more than 80% of the active employees who are in DB plans are in plans that are not frozen. Now, does that mean that there aren't some that are in plans that are frozen? Yes, there are. About 10% are in hard frozen plans, and a little less than 10% are in partially frozen plans. But the fact of the matter is that the ice age hasn't happened yet. My view is, one, we've got a forum that actually does offers a better service. We should do what we can to preserve it. The other issue that matters, from my perspective, is that we have been frozen, in part by regulatory stasis, into more or less two models. One is the relatively traditional final average pay defined benefit plan, and the other is what I will call, just pejoratively, just so that you understand the lack of knowledge that I have about DC plans, the traditional DC plan. But the fact of the matter is that employers all across the country have been looking for ways to compromise, looking for options that allow them to get some of the benefits of DB and some of the benefits of DC. Right now, if you look at the private employees in DB plans, 40% of them are in plans that have a hybrid feature. What that says to me is there is an appetite for options, and we should facilitate it. Government is, both in the US and in the UK, an encourager of retirement security and a regulator of retirement security. And one of the constant challenges is that in our efforts to provide some reasonable framework for people to understand what kind of retirement security they get, so that if you have this kind of pension plan, you should have the following set of expectations. In our efforts to do that, which are perfectly sensible, entirely within the framework of ERISA, we nonetheless make it harder for people to develop new proposals. We make it harder, for example, for insurance companies to offer products that are DC to the employer but DB to the employee. And so that is the challenge for government, both the executive and legislative branch. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the PBGC effort because this is public, but I'll talk about maybe. On the single employer side, the way we act is when plans are in trouble or plan sponsors are in trouble. We step in, we take over both assets and obligations. That gives us some room within which to work. And as a result, right now, we have we're responsible for the pensions of about 1.5 million people. On the single employer side, we have assets of just under $80 billion. We have obligations of $100 billion. Our net position, as you can see, is $23 billion. And our premiums, which are determined by Congress, are $2 billion. So this is a long, slow financial inadequacy to work out. On the multi-employer side, the situation is very different. And the reason for that is that on the multi-employer side, the PBGC does not come in until the plan is literally insolvent. That has several consequences. One is it means that the PBGC has no assets from previously acquired plans with which to work. And it means that it's coming at a time when it's kind of too late to do very much. So as a result, on the multi-employer side, we have a little bit of assets, we have a lot more obligations, and unless there is some change in our premium structure, our program there will become insolvent, and will become insolvent relatively more quickly than in the single employer universe. Because our premiums have historically been set too low, our books have shown a deficit for a decade. That deficit is not going to go away. To tick off what I consider to be the obvious issues, one is the fact that premiums are set by law. Historically, they've been set too low. They are not risk adjusted, and they're not fully exposure adjusted. Second, that by comparison with a private insurance company, and by the way, by comparison with the PPF, the agency has relatively few tools to manage its risk. We don't set our own premiums, we don't underwrite, we can't refuse to manage someone, and it turns out that both before and after bankruptcy, the agency has relatively limited tools as a creditor. PBGC, in addition to saving pensions, has a mandate to enhance retirement security, to encourage the preservation of voluntary plans, which is why I spend time talking about the broader set of issues. Some people would say you should plan more, or you should get a better financial advisor. That's not where I am. My advice is really simple. People don't set aside enough. You should set aside 10% of what you earn every year, good times and bad, in a pension savings account. If you do that, I don't care whether the markets go up or down over your working lifetime, you'll be secure when you retire. If you don't do that, you're at the mercy of whatever 401k you might or might not have.